The morning started like any other Tuesday for Captain Robert Hayes. He'd been flying commercial planes for nearly 16 years now, and honestly, most days blended together in a comfortable rhythm. Wake up at 4:30, strong coffee, drive to the airport, run through the same pre-flight checks he could probably do in his sleep. But that's what made him good at his job. The routine, the consistency, the ability to stay calm when everything around him was moving at 500 miles per hour. That particular morning, Robert was scheduled to fly from Chicago to Denver. Nothing special about the route. He'd flown it maybe 200 times before. As he walked through the terminal toward Gate B7, his co-pilot Jason caught up with him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Morning, Captain. Thought you could use this," Jason said, handing him one of the cups. "You're a lifesaver," Robert replied, taking a grateful sip. "How's the weather looking?" "Clear skies most of the way. Should be smooth sailing." They made their way to the aircraft, going through their usual banter about weekend plans and the latest news. It was the kind of easy conversation that comes from flying together for 3 years. Robert liked Jason. The kid was sharp, asked good questions, and didn't panic when things got complicated. Inside the cockpit, they began their checks. Fuel levels, instruments, communication systems. Everything had to be perfect before a single passenger stepped on board. Robert had learned early in his career that there was no such thing as being too careful. One small mistake at 30,000 feet could mean disaster. As passengers began boarding, Robert glanced at the monitor showing the cabin. He always liked to watch people settle in. You could tell a lot about a flight by observing the passengers. Business travelers who'd done this 1,000 times. Families excited about vacations. Nervous first-time flyers gripping their armrests before the plane even moved. Then he noticed her. A woman in her early 30s struggling with a carry-on bag that seemed too heavy for her. She was crying, trying to hide it, but her shoulders were shaking. Next to her stood a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with long dark hair pulled into a ponytail. The child wasn't crying. She just stood there, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had clearly seen better days. The rabbit's fur was matted, one ear was sewn back on with mismatched thread, and it had that worn look of something that had been loved almost to death. Something about the scene bothered Robert. Not bothered in an annoyed way, but in that gut-feeling way that tells you something's wrong. "Jason, you see that woman and kid in row 12? Robert asked quietly. Jason glanced at the monitor. "Yes, a rough morning, I guess. Keep an eye on them, will you?" "Just a feeling," Jason nodded. He'd learned to trust Robert's instincts. The boarding process continued. Robert went through his announcements, checking that everything was secure. The flight attendants did their safety demonstration. Standard procedure. But Robert's mind kept drifting back to that woman and her daughter. As they taxied toward the runway, Robert overheard something on the cabin intercom. One of the flight attendants, Lisa, was near row 12, and her voice came through clearly. "Ma'am, are you all right? Can I get you some water?" "I'm fine, thank you." The woman's voice was tight, controlled, like she was holding back an ocean of emotion behind a cracking dam. "Is your daughter okay? She looks a little pale. She's just tired. We've been traveling since yesterday." There was something in that response, something that didn't quite fit. Robert had 3 kids of his own, and he knew the difference between a tired child and a sick one. The little girl on the monitor didn't look tired. She looked fragile, like a bird with broken wings trying to appear strong. The flight took off smoothly. Robert loved this part, feeling the power of the engines as they lifted off the ground, watching the city shrink below them. No matter how many times he did it, there was still something magical about defying gravity. Once they reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign was off, Jason took over the controls for a bit. Robert stood up to stretch his legs. Through the small cockpit door window, he could see down the aisle. The woman from row 12 was on her phone, turned toward the window, her hand covering her mouth. Even from this distance, Robert could see her body tensing with each word she spoke. Lisa, the flight attendant, knocked softly on the cockpit door. Robert opened it. "Captain, I don't mean to worry you, but I think you should know something," she said quietly. "That woman in row 12, I heard part of her phone call before we took off. She was saying something about a last chance and running out of time. And the little girl, she's got some kind of medical bracelet on. I couldn't read what it said, but the girl looks really unwell." Robert felt that tightness in his chest. The one that came when he knew something was seriously wrong but didn't yet know what to do about it. "Thanks." "Lisa, Keep me updated if anything changes." She nodded and headed back to the cabin. Robert returned to his seat, but his mind was racing now. In all his years of flying, he'd learned that people carried stories with them. Hidden stories. Sometimes those stories were simple, like a business meeting or a family reunion, but sometimes they were the kind of stories that changed everything. The kind where someone's whole world was balancing on a knife's edge and a flight wasn't just a flight. It was a desperate race against time. He looked at Jason. "I've got a weird feeling about this one." "What kind of feeling?" "The kind that says this isn't just another Tuesday." Jason raised an eyebrow but didn't question him. He'd learned that Robert's feelings were usually worth paying attention to. As the plane cut through the clouds toward Denver, Robert couldn't shake the image of that little girl clutching her worn rabbit, trying so hard to be brave. He didn't know her story yet. Didn't know what brought them on this flight or what was waiting for them in Denver. But somehow deep in his gut, Robert knew that before this day was over, nothing would be routine anymore. The sky ahead was clear and blue, but Robert sensed a storm coming. Not the kind you could see on radar, the kind that tests what you're really made of when faced with someone else's crisis. And Captain Robert Hayes, who thought he'd seen everything in 16 years of flying, was about to discover that the most important flight of his career had nothing to do with reaching a destination on time. It had everything to do with what he would choose to do when he saw someone falling, and whether he'd have the courage to reach out and catch them. 20 minutes into the flight, Robert couldn't concentrate. He kept glancing at the cabin monitor, watching row 12. The little girl had her head resting against the window now, still holding that rabbit. Her mother sat rigid, staring straight ahead, occasionally wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Jason noticed his captain's distraction. "You're really worried about them, aren't you?" "Yeah," Robert admitted. "Something's not right. Can you handle things for a bit? I want Lisa to check on them again." "Of course. Go ahead." Robert called Lisa to the cockpit. When she arrived, he kept his voice low. "The woman and girl in row 12. I need you to check on them properly. Not just a quick, 'Are you okay?' but really talk to them. Find out if they need anything." Lisa nodded, understanding the unspoken concern in his voice. "I'll go now." Robert watched through the monitor as Lisa approached row 12. He couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see the body language. The mother shaking her head at first, clearly saying she was fine. Lisa persisting gently, crouching down in the aisle to be at eye level. Then something shifted. The mother's shoulders dropped and she started talking. Really talking. Her hands moved as she spoke, touching her daughter's arm, then covering her own face. 5 minutes later, Lisa returned to the cockpit. Her expression told Robert everything he needed to know before she even spoke. "Captain, you were right to worry. That woman's name is Rebecca. The little girl is her daughter, Sophie. They're flying to Denver because Sophie needs a heart transplant." Robert felt like someone had punched him in the chest. A heart transplant. Sophie was born with a heart defect. She's been on the waiting list for 2 years. Yesterday they got a call. There's a potential donor, but it's complicated. The heart is available, but there's another child who also matches. The hospital told Rebecca they need to be there by tonight because they're making the final decision on who gets it. Jason turned around in his seat, his face pale. That's why she was crying. "There's more," Lisa continued. "Rebecca said they've spent everything they have on medical bills. This flight was the last of their savings. She sold her car to afford the tickets. If Sophie doesn't get this heart, they don't know what happens next. The doctors say Sophie doesn't have much time left." Robert sat back in his seat, processing this information. In the silence of the cockpit, he could hear his own heartbeat. He thought about his own kids at home. Healthy, running around, complaining about homework and begging for extra screen time. Normal problems. Normal lives. He tried to imagine what it would feel like to watch your child slowly fading, knowing that somewhere out there was the one thing that could save her. But you might not get it. "Did she say anything else?" Robert asked quietly. "She apologized for crying." "Can you believe that?" "She apologized. Said she was trying to hold it together for Sophie's sake." The little girl doesn't fully understand what's happening. She thinks they're going to Denver so the doctors can make her feel better. She doesn't know it's life or death. Robert looked at the monitor again. Sophie had fallen asleep now, her small chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Rebecca was stroking her daughter's hair with such tenderness it made Robert's throat tight. "Thanks, Lisa. Keep checking on them, okay?" And if they need anything at all, make sure they get it. Already on it, Captain. After Lisa left, Robert and Jason sat in silence for a while. The plane hummed around them, cutting through the air at 500 miles per hour. Outside, the world looked peaceful, clouds like cotton candy, blue sky stretching forever. But inside this metal tube, a family was racing against time, and suddenly the flight felt different. It wasn't just another routine trip anymore. "What are you thinking?" Jason finally asked. "I'm thinking about how many people we've flown over the years, thousands, tens of thousands. And we never really know their stories, do we? Everyone's just a seat number. But every single person has something going on. Some kind of struggle or hope or fear." Jason nodded slowly. "Makes you realize how small our problems are sometimes." "Yeah." Robert paused, then made a decision. "I'm going to talk to them." "What?" "Captain, that's not really protocol." "I know, but protocol doesn't cover everything, does it? Sometimes you just have to be human." Robert set the plane on autopilot, checked all the instruments twice, and then stood up. His heart was pounding harder than it did during emergency landing drills. This felt more important somehow. More real. He walked down the aisle, past business travelers typing on laptops, past a family playing cards, past a man snoring with his mouth open. When he reached row 12, he paused. Rebecca had her eyes closed, but he could tell she wasn't sleeping. Sophie was curled up against her, breathing softly. "Excuse me," Robert said gently. "I'm Captain Hayes. May I sit for a moment?" Rebecca's eyes opened, immediately filling with worry. "Is something wrong with the flight?" No. Everything's fine. I just wanted to check on you and your daughter. My flight attendant told me a bit about your situation." "I hope that's okay." Rebecca's face flushed. "I'm sorry if I've been disruptive. I tried to keep it together, but please don't apologize," Robert interrupted. "You haven't been disruptive at all. I just wanted you to know that if there's anything we can do to help, anything at all, please let me know." Rebecca looked at him with such exhaustion and gratitude mixed together. "That's kind of you, but unless you can make the plane fly faster, I don't know what anyone can do. We just have to get there and hope." Robert glanced at Sophie, sleeping peacefully despite everything. "How long has she been sick?" "Her whole life. But it got worse this past year. She used to be able to play a little, go to school. Now she gets tired just walking across a room. She's so brave, though. She never complains. She just holds that rabbit and tells me stories about what she'll do when she feels better." "What kind of stories?" A small smile crossed Rebecca's face. "She wants to learn to dance. Can you imagine? A little girl with a failing heart dreams about dancing. She says when she gets her new heart, the first thing she'll do is spin in circles until she gets dizzy." Robert felt his eyes starting to burn. He blinked hard. "She sounds like an amazing kid." "She is. She's everything." They sat in silence for a moment. Robert didn't have magic words to make this better. He couldn't promise Sophie would get the heart. He couldn't promise any of this would work out. But sitting there, seeing this mother's quiet desperation, something shifted inside him. "Rebecca, I want you to know something. When we land in Denver, I'm going to make sure you get off this plane first. We'll have a wheelchair ready for Sophie if she needs it, and I'm going to personally make sure you get to where you need to go as fast as possible. You don't have to do that. I know, but I'm going to anyway." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears again. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means." But Robert was already thinking beyond the landing. As he walked back to the cockpit, his mind was racing. There had to be more he could do, more than just getting them off the plane quickly. This wasn't just about flying anymore. This was about a little girl who wanted to dance and a mother who had given everything for a chance. And somehow Robert knew that when they landed in Denver, his involvement in their story was only just beginning. Robert couldn't get back to the cockpit fast enough. His mind was spinning with possibilities, with ideas, with that urgent feeling you get when you know you have to do something but you're not quite sure what yet. Jason looked up as Robert slid back into his seat. "How'd it go?" "We need to land this plane perfectly. No delays, no circling, nothing. That little girl is running out of time. Already on it. I've contacted Denver Tower. They're clearing us for priority approach." Robert nodded, grateful for Jason's quick thinking. But as he stared at the instruments in front of him, he realized something. Getting Rebecca and Sophie off the plane quickly was just the beginning. What happened after they landed? How would they get to the hospital? Did Rebecca even have money for a taxi? And once they got there, then what? Wait and hope while another family waited and hoped for the same heart? The thought made him feel sick. 2 families. 2 children. 1 heart. Someone was going to lose their child and there was nothing fair about it. He picked up his phone. Company policy said pilots shouldn't make personal calls during flights except for emergencies. Well, this felt like an emergency to him. His wife answered on the second ring. Robert, is everything okay? You never called during flights. I'm fine, sweetheart. But I need to ask you something. Remember when my brother died? Remember how we always said we wished we could do more to help other families going through what we went through? There was a pause. His brother's death 15 years ago had changed their whole family. A motorcycle accident, sudden and devastating. But Tom had been an organ donor, and knowing that his death had saved other lives had been the only comfort in that dark time. Of course I remember. Why? What's going on? Robert explained everything. Rebecca, Sophie, the heart transplant, the impossible choice ahead. His wife listened without interrupting, and he could hear her crying softly by the end. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice steady despite the tears. I don't know yet. I just needed to tell someone. I can't just fly these people to Denver and forget about them. I can't. Then don't. Robert, you've always had a good heart. If you feel like you need to help, then help. We'll figure out how. After hanging up, Robert felt a little steadier, but he still didn't have a plan. He looked at his watch. 2 hours until landing. 2 hours to figure out how to make a difference. Then he remembered something. The airline he worked for had some kind of charity program. He'd gotten emails about it over the years, but had never paid much attention. Something about helping passengers in crisis. He'd always thought it was just corporate talk, a way for the company to look good, but maybe there was something real there. He pulled up his email on his phone and started searching. There it was. The Wings of Hope Foundation. Emergency assistance for passengers facing medical crises. He opened the information page and started reading. 10 minutes later, he was on the phone with a woman named Patricia who ran the program. Captain Hayes, what can I do for you? Robert explained the situation for what felt like the 10th time. As he talked, he watched Denver growing closer through the windshield. They were making good time. Patricia was quiet for a moment after he finished. This is exactly the kind of situation our program was designed for. Here's what I can do immediately. We can have a car waiting at the airport to take them directly to the hospital. We can also provide some emergency funds to help with immediate expenses. But Captain, I need to be honest with you. We can't influence who gets the heart. That's a medical decision, I know. I'm not asking you to. I just want to give them every possible chance. Every advantage I can, I understand. Give me the passenger's information and I'll have everything arranged before you land. After providing Rebecca's details, Robert felt a small weight lift from his shoulders. At least they'd get to the hospital quickly. At least they'd have one less thing to worry about. But he couldn't shake the bigger problem. Even if Sophie got to the hospital on time, there was still another child competing for the same heart. How do you choose between 2 lives? How do doctors make that kind of decision? The rest of the flight passed in a blur. Robert went through all the necessary procedures on autopilot, his mind elsewhere. Jason handled most of the communications with the tower, sensing that his captain needed space to think. As they began their descent into Denver, Robert made another decision, one that surprised even himself. Jason, after we land, I'm going with them to the hospital. Jason's head whipped around. What? Captain, we have a return flight in 4 hours. I know. I'll call dispatch. They can find another pilot. This is more important. Are you sure about this? You don't even know these people. Robert thought about that for a moment. You're right. I don't know them. But I know what it's like to lose someone you love. And I know that if I just walk away now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Sometimes you meet people for a reason, you know? Maybe I was supposed to be on this flight. Maybe there's something I'm supposed to do. Jason studied his captain's face and then nodded slowly. Okay, if you're sure, I'll back you up with dispatch. Tell them it was a medical emergency or something. Thanks, Jason, you're a good man. The landing was smooth. Robert had flown this route hundreds of times, but he'd never been more focused than he was right now. Every movement had to be perfect. No mistakes, no delays. As soon as they touched down and taxied to the gate, Robert was on his feet. He grabbed his jacket and headed straight for row 12 before the seatbelt sign was even off. Rebecca looked up, startled. Sophie was awake now, looking even paler than before. Rebecca, I need you to listen carefully. There's a car waiting for you right outside the gate. It's going to take you directly to the hospital. Everything's already arranged. What, how? I don't understand. Don't worry about how. Just get Sophie and follow me. I'm coming with you. You're what? Rebecca stood up, confusion and hope mixing on her face. I'm coming to the hospital with you. You shouldn't have to do this alone. Tears started streaming down Rebecca's face again. Why are you doing this? You don't even know us. Robert looked at Sophie, who was watching him with those big tired eyes. She reminded him of his own daughter. Same age, same curiosity about the world. But his daughter was healthy, safe at home, worried about what to pack for lunch tomorrow. Sophie was fighting just to see tomorrow. Because someone should, he said simply. Now come on, we don't have time to waste. He picked up Sophie gently and she didn't protest. She just wrapped her small arms around his neck and rested her head on his shoulder. The stuffed rabbit was squashed between them. Are you really a pilot? Sophie whispered. I really am. That's so cool. I've never met a pilot before. Robert felt his throat tighten. Well, I've never met a girl as brave as you before, so I guess we're even. As they hurried through the airport, Robert had no idea what would happen next. He didn't know if Sophie would get the heart. He didn't know if his impulsive decision to get involved would actually help or just make him feel better about himself. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let this family face their darkest moment alone. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together. And somehow that felt like the most important flight decision he'd ever made, even though his feet were firmly on the ground. The car ride to the hospital felt like the longest 20 minutes of Robert's life. Sophie sat in the back seat between him and Rebecca, still clutching her rabbit, her breathing shallow and uneven. Rebecca held her daughter's hand so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Mom, I'm scared, Sophie whispered. I know, baby, but we're almost there. The doctors are going to help you. Robert looked out the window at Denver passing by. Ordinary people going about their ordinary days. Walking dogs, waiting at crosswalks, laughing with friends. None of them knowing that in this car, a little girl's life hung in the balance. When they arrived at Children's Hospital, Colorado, a nurse was already waiting at the entrance with a wheelchair. Word had apparently spread fast about their arrival. Rebecca Martinez? The nurse asked. Yes, that's us. Follow me, Dr. Patterson is waiting for you. They moved quickly through the corridors, past colorful murals of animals and rainbows meant to make sick children feel less afraid. Robert noticed Sophie looking at them, her eyes lingering on a painted giraffe wearing a silly hat. Dr. Patterson met them in a small consultation room. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the tired look of someone who made impossible decisions for a living. Rebecca, Sophie, I'm glad you made it safely. Her eyes shifted to Robert. And you are? Captain Robert Hayes, I flew them here. I'm just here to support them. Dr. Patterson nodded, seeming to understand without needing more explanation. Sophie, sweetheart, the nurses are going to take you to get checked in and run some tests. Your mom will be right there with you, okay? Sophie nodded bravely and let a nurse wheel her away, Rebecca walking beside her. Before they disappeared down the hall, Rebecca looked back at Robert with an expression that was part gratitude, part terror. Dr. Patterson gestured for Robert to sit. Captain Hayes, since you're here, there's something you should understand about the situation. I'm listening. The donor heart became available yesterday. It's a match for 2 children. Sophie is one. A little boy named Daniel is the other. Both children desperately need this transplant. Both have equal medical priority. Robert felt his stomach drop. So how do you decide? That's the impossible part of my job. We look at every factor: tissue compatibility, wait time, medical urgency, likelihood of success. Sometimes one patient has a clear advantage. Sometimes, like now, it's almost exactly equal. Almost? Dr. Patterson sighed deeply. Sophie has been waiting 2 months longer than Daniel, but Daniel's condition has deteriorated slightly faster this past week. Sophie is stable for now, which is actually a point against her in terms of urgency. The committee meets in 3 hours to make the final decision. Robert couldn't believe what he was hearing. You're telling me that being stable might cost her the heart? I'm telling you that there are no good answers here. No matter what we decide, a family goes home heartbroken. A child doesn't get the chance they deserve. Dr. Patterson's voice cracked slightly. I've been doing this for 20 years and I still lose sleep over these decisions. Robert sat back, feeling helpless. He'd come all this way, gotten them here safely, and now there was nothing more he could do. The decision was out of everyone's hands except the medical committee's. "Is there anything that could change the equation?" he asked quietly. "Anything at all?" "Only if another donor became available. But Captain Hayes, you need to understand how rare that is. The odds of finding another matching heart in the next few hours are astronomical. We're talking about finding someone with the right blood type, tissue markers, body size, who dies in exactly the right circumstances, whose family consents to donation, and who's within transportable distance. It's not impossible, but it's close." Robert pulled out his phone. He didn't know what he was going to do, but he had to try something. Anything. "Dr. Patterson, my brother died 15 years ago. He was an organ donor. His death saved 3 lives. My family started a small charity in his name to promote organ donation awareness. It's not much, just a local thing, but maybe they know people. Maybe there's something." "Every bit of awareness helps," Dr. Patterson said gently. "But I don't want to give you false hope. Hope is all we have right now, isn't it?" After Dr. Patterson left, Robert started making calls. First to his parents, who ran the charity. His mother answered, "Mom, I need your help. I need you to reach out to everyone in your network. I need you to make noise about organ donation, today, right now." He explained everything. His mother listened, and he could hear his father in the background asking questions. "Robert, we'll do everything we can. We'll post on social media, call the news stations we've worked with, reach out to all our contacts. But son, you know the chances are slim." "I know, Mom. But we have to try." Next, he called an old friend from college who had become a journalist at a local news station. The call went to voicemail. "Hey, it's Robert Hayes. I know we haven't talked in a while, but I'm at Children's Hospital in Denver, and there's a story here that needs to be told. 2 kids need the same heart. Call me back, please." Then he started posting on his own social media. He wasn't usually active online, but he wrote from the heart about what he'd witnessed. About Sophie and her dream of dancing. About the impossible choice facing the hospital. About the urgent need for organ donors. He posted it and watched as it sat there with 0 likes, 0 shares. Just words on a screen that probably wouldn't change anything. 40 minutes passed. Robert sat in the waiting room, checking his phone every 30 seconds. Rebecca came out briefly to update him. Sophie was being prepped for surgery just in case. They had to be ready if the committee chose her. "How are you holding up?" Robert asked. "I keep thinking about Daniel's parents," Rebecca said softly. "They must be going through the same agony, hoping their child gets chosen, praying for a miracle. It feels wrong to hope my daughter gets something that means their son doesn't. That's not wrong. That's being a mother. But what if we get the heart and he dies? How do I live with that?" Robert didn't have an answer. He just sat with her in the silence of impossible questions. Then his phone rang. It was his journalist friend. "Robert, I got your message. I'm actually going to be in your area in an hour covering another story. Can you talk on camera?" "Yes, absolutely yes." "Okay, I can't promise anything, but if we can get this on the evening news, maybe it reaches someone who needs to see it." After hanging up, Robert felt the smallest flicker of hope. Then his mother called back. "Robert, we've been making calls. We reached out to the organ donation registry in Wyoming and Montana. They're putting out urgent alerts, and we got 2 local news stations to agree to mention it in their broadcasts. Thank you, Mom, thank you so much." But even as he thanked her, Robert knew the odds. He'd been a pilot long enough to understand probability. You don't bank on miracles. You plan for reality. Still, as he sat in that waiting room, watching Rebecca pray silently with her eyes closed, he found himself praying too. Not just for Sophie, for Daniel too, for both families, for something impossible to happen, for a miracle that could save both children instead of forcing the universe to choose between 2 precious lives. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife. "I'm so proud of you. Come home when you can. We love you." Robert looked up at the clock. 2 hours until the committee meeting. 2 hours for something impossible to become possible. 2 hours for hope to either bloom or die. He'd flown through storms before, through turbulence that shook the plane so hard people screamed, through mechanical failures and close calls that tested every bit of his training, but he'd never felt as powerless as he did right now. Sitting in a hospital waiting room, waiting for a decision that would break one family's heart no matter what. All he could do was wait, and hope. And somehow in the deepest part of his soul, believed that all the calls and prayers and desperate reaching out might somehow make a difference. 1 hour before the committee meeting, Robert's phone exploded with notifications. His social media post had been shared by someone with a large following, then shared again, and again. Within minutes, thousands of people were reading about Sophie and Daniel. Comments poured in. People sharing their own stories of loss, of receiving transplants, of being donors. The post was spreading faster than Robert could track. His journalist friend called. "Robert, we're going live with your story in 10 minutes. It's leading our evening broadcast. Are you ready?" Robert did the interview in the hospital lobby, trying to keep his voice steady as he explained the situation. He talked about Sophie's dream of dancing, about Rebecca's courage, about the impossible choice facing the hospital, and he made a plea for everyone watching to consider becoming organ donors. "These situations shouldn't have to be either or," he said to the camera. "There are people waiting all over the country. If you've been thinking about registering as a donor, do it today, right now. You could save a life." The interview aired at 5:30. Robert watched it on his phone, wondering if any of this would matter. If it would be enough. Rebecca found him in the lobby. "The committee meets in 45 minutes. They're going to tell us their decision right after. I don't know if I can breathe until then. Where's Sophie?" "Resting. They gave her something to keep her comfortable. She doesn't really understand what's happening. She thinks she's just getting checked by doctors." Rebecca's voice broke. "How do I tell her if they choose Daniel? How do I explain that someone else needed it more?" Before Robert could answer, Dr. Patterson appeared, walking quickly down the hallway. Her expression was unreadable. "Rebecca, Captain Hayes, I need you both to come with me, now." Robert's heart dropped. It was too early. The committee hadn't met yet. This had to be bad news. They followed Dr. Patterson to her office. Inside, another doctor was waiting, a man Robert hadn't met before. "This is Dr. Chen, head of our transplant program," Dr. Patterson said. Her voice was shaking slightly, and Robert couldn't tell if it was from exhaustion or emotion. "What's wrong?" Rebecca asked, her face pale. Dr. Chen stepped forward. "Nothing's wrong. Something extraordinary just happened. About 20 minutes ago, we received a call from a hospital in Montana. A young man was in a severe car accident this afternoon. He didn't make it, but his family knew he was an organ donor. His heart is a match for Daniel." Robert felt the room spin. "Wait, what?" "Daniel has a match," Dr. Patterson repeated, and now Robert could see she was crying. "Which means the heart here goes to Sophie. Both children are getting their transplants." Rebecca collapsed into a chair, her hands covering her face. The sound she made was somewhere between a sob and a laugh. Both children?" "Both children," Dr. Chen confirmed. "Daniel's heart is being transported as we speak. We're prepping both operating rooms right now. Sophie's surgery will begin within the hour." Robert couldn't move, couldn't speak. His mind was racing through everything that had happened. The social media posts, the news coverage, his mother's calls to organ donation registries in Montana. Had any of it made a difference? Had the young man's family seen the story? Or was it just an impossible coincidence? A miracle of timing that had nothing to do with anything they'd done? It didn't matter. What mattered was that Sophie would get her heart. And Daniel would get his. Two families would get to keep their children. Rebecca stood up suddenly and hugged Dr. Patterson, then Dr. Chen, then turned to Robert and threw her arms around him. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not just flying us here and forgetting about us. Thank you for caring." "I didn't do anything," Robert said, his own voice thick with emotion. "This was just luck, timing." "Maybe," Rebecca said, pulling back to look at him. "Or maybe you made enough noise that someone heard it. Maybe that family in Montana saw the story, and it reminded them of why their son chose to be a donor. Maybe it mattered. We'll never know. But you tried. When you didn't have to, you tried." The next few hours passed in a blur. Robert stayed at the hospital, sitting in the surgical waiting room with Rebecca. They barely talked. There wasn't much to say. They just waited, watching the clock, hoping. Across the hospital, he knew Daniel's parents were doing the same thing. Two families who would never meet, both holding their breath, both praying for the same miracle from different rooms. 7 hours after Sophie went into surgery, Dr. Patterson emerged in her surgical scrubs. She was smiling. She did beautifully. The heart is strong. She's in recovery now and she's stable. "Rebecca, your daughter is going to be okay." Rebecca broke down completely. Robert held her while she cried, feeling his own tears finally fall. All the fear and hope and desperate action of the past 12 hours came pouring out. "Can I see her?" Rebecca asked when she could speak again. "Soon. She needs to rest, but you can see her soon." 3 months later, Robert received a letter at his home. Inside was a drawing from Sophie. It showed a stick figure girl with a big smile, arms stretched out wide, spinning in circles. Hearts were drawn all around her. At the bottom, in careful, wobbly handwriting, it said, "I can dance now. Thank you, Captain Robert. Love, Sophie." There was also a note from Rebecca. She'd gone back to work. Sophie was in school, playing with friends, living the normal life of a healthy 8-year-old. She'd started taking dance classes. Every night, she hugged her worn stuffed rabbit and said a prayer for the person who'd given her a second chance at life. Rebecca had also started volunteering with Robert's parents at their organ donation charity. She spoke at events sharing Sophie's story, encouraging people to register as donors. The story had inspired hundreds of people in their community to sign up. "You changed our lives," Rebecca wrote, "not just by helping us get to Denver, but by showing us that strangers can become family when it matters most. Sophie asks about you all the time. She tells everyone about the pilot who carried her to her miracle. Thank you for being exactly who you are." Robert kept the drawing on his refrigerator. Every morning before work, he'd see it and remember that flight. Remember Sophie sleeping with her rabbit. Remember making the choice to get involved when it would have been easier to just do his job and move on. He'd gone back to flying regular routes, Chicago to Denver and back, over and over, just like before. But it wasn't the same anymore. He looked at passengers differently now, saw them as people with stories, with struggles, with hopes and fears hidden beneath their everyday faces. He'd started a program with his airline to train flight crews to recognize passengers in crisis and connect them with resources. The Wings of Hope Foundation had expanded because of the attention from Sophie's story. They were helping dozens of families every month now, but more than any of that, Robert had learned something about himself. He'd learned that sometimes the most important moments in life aren't planned. They're not in any manual or training program. They're the moments when you see someone falling and you make the split-second decision to reach out and catch them. 6 months after the transplant, Robert got another surprise. His airline arranged for Sophie and Rebecca to fly to Chicago to meet him properly. They had a layover and Robert brought his whole family to the airport. Sophie ran to him the moment she saw him, her new heart strong and steady in her chest. She showed him how she could spin in circles without getting tired. She performed a little dance routine she'd learned in class. And she hugged him so tight that Robert felt like his own heart might burst. "You saved my life," Sophie said simply. "No, sweetheart. A lot of people saved your life. Doctors and nurses and someone very brave who chose to be a donor. I just flew the plane." "You did more than that," Rebecca said quietly. "You saw us. You cared. You acted. That's everything." As Robert watched Sophie dance around the airport terminal, full of energy and joy and life, he thought about all the coincidences that had to align for this moment to exist. The timing of the flight, the seat assignment, his decision to check on them, the news coverage, the donor in Montana, every small piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Some people would call it luck. Others would call it fate or divine intervention. Robert just called it being human, recognizing someone in need and deciding that their crisis was worth his time, worth his effort, worth stepping outside the comfortable routine of his normal life. He'd been flying for 16 years, transporting millions of passengers safely from one place to another. But that single flight, that one ordinary Tuesday that became extraordinary, had meant more than all the others combined. Because he hadn't just transported Sophie to Denver. He'd carried her toward hope. And sometimes that's what miracles really are. Not magic from the sky, but ordinary people deciding to care, deciding to help, deciding that someone else's life matters as much as their own. Sophie would grow up. She'd become a dancer, just like she'd dreamed. And somewhere in Montana, another family would carry the bittersweet knowledge that their loss had given 2 children a future. 2 families instead of 1. Because in the end there had been enough hope to go around. Enough hearts, literally, to save everyone who needed saving. And it had all started with a pilot who refused to look away from a crying woman in row 12.